So, in the previous video, I talked about the definition of winning on one side and the importance of losing on the other side. And the real gist of it was that if you're always losing in training, you're going to get demotivated, probably stop training. If you're always winning in training, your training is probably not realistic and you're in for a rude awakening. You might also develop a bit of an unhealthy ego. There's got to be a balance. But there's a lot of it that we have to adjust personally based on our training context, training outcomes, training mode, in other words, how we are trained and who we train with. So you have to calibrate your definition of winning for different situations, right? Feel free to watch that video to get more info. Now, the next step from that is actually to understand the importance of cross-training with experts. I've spoken extensively in the past about the importance of cross-training from a variety of contexts, but if we're looking at self-defense, which is the stuff that I always come back to, if I'm looking at developing well-rounded skills in the long term, there's a couple of things that have to happen. I have to be able to fight at multiple ranges because that's how fights happen, right? Most of the time we start at some distance, close the distance, grapple, and maybe end up on the ground. That means I have to be able to fight at weapon range, at kickboxing range, at boxing range, in the clinch, whether that's striking or takedowns, and then on the ground you have to do that with weapons and multiple attackers and a bunch of other stuff, okay? So I have to train in all those modes of training and I have to understand how to switch from one to the other smoothly, right? But one of the things that's also really important is to understand that while everybody will have preferences, right? And MMA is a really good example of that. You might get somebody who's a phenomenal striker, but they still do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling to a sufficient level that will allow them to stop being taken down or get back up on their feet quickly. So while they definitely have a preference for one mode of fighting or training, they still train in a well-rounded way to facilitate them being able to find that mode of training, mode of fighting. Now, in a self-defense context, the same thing might happen. We might have a natural affinity or desire to gravitate towards one mode of training, even though that should really be dictated by use of force more than anything else. What I do at different levels depend on the level of force I need to use. But the important thing is, if you train with somebody who is well-rounded, you might experience that you'll get better at all the different aspects to a certain degree. To really get good at each one of those, you have to train with somebody who specializes in that mode of training. In other words, if you want to get really good striking, well, go train with somebody who does Muay Thai or boxing primarily. So find a good boxing coach, find a good Muay Thai coach or a good kickboxing coach or a good full contact karate coach, and do that. If you want to get really good at fighting on the ground, find yourself a really good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach. If you want to get good at fighting in the clinch, do some Muay Thai or find yourself a really good Judo coach or a good Jiu-Jitsu coach, so on and so forth. And then put them together, right? There are some really important benefits to training with experts as opposed to jacks of all trades. Number one is they're going to be able to give you much more depth in terms of the specific mechanics and technique and refinement of that particular mode of fighting. Right? So if I'm going to somebody who's a really good boxing coach, I know I'm going to be focusing narrow and deep in terms of a skill set. I'm going to look at a very specific skill set, but I'll be able to dive quite deep with my coach in terms of really understanding the finer nuances of how things work. Same with grappling, right? I'm going to go narrow and then deep. Same with wrestling or stand-up fighting, clinch fighting, narrow and deep. Once I've done that with multiple experts, I can then look at integration. And it might be that in that case, I might even have to look to somebody who specializes at integration, like somebody who's a really good MMA coach and understands how the skills integrate seamlessly. Okay, so this is really similar to what we see in a lot of organizations there. We talk about busting silos, right? You have people who are experts in different areas of the business, but really we have to work together. Exactly the same thing happens when we talk about fighting systems, right? We need to find different skills and integrate them together. But in order to learn those skills, you have to train with people who are experts. So, one more time, right? Training with experts is incredibly important. Maintaining a well-balanced skill set is also important. So while I'm training with an expert, I don't want to neglect all my other skills. Training with an expert is going to give you, number one, a much better depth of understanding. Two, it's going to accelerate your improvement, right? So if I focus on a narrow skill base and I train with somebody who understands the nuances and specialist in that, there's a very good chance I'm going to improve much more quickly than if I train with somebody who's well-rounded. Okay, so find some experts, train with them, and then remember to always take what you're learning in those experts and translate that to whatever context of training you're looking to apply. So, take your boxing, jiu-jitsu, wrestling into self-defense or vice versa, whatever it is. Any questions? Let me know.